everyone.
Hello.
Hey.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Caitlyn Cowie.
Yeah, my first F.
The other Caitlyn. We
The
have
other
three
Caitlyn.
Caitlyns on the Kid Link team. So
That's going to be very confusing, isn't it?
it is, and I'm going to put a disclaimer. I'm going to call you Cowie for the rest of the
it is
episode.
hard not to slip up. We do call her Cowie, so
Yeah.
for the purpose of us not messing this up, we'll just call her Cowie.
Yeah.
And the other Caitlyn is Katie or Katie.
Yes, but though you keep calling me Katie as well, so it's very confusing. But welcome, Cowie. We're so
Thank you.
excited to have you here.
PDA.
Welcome to PIP. Yeah, we're
Yes.
chatting about PDA today.
Yep, pathological demand avoidance.
Yeah, and I suppose we decided to have you on this episode.
Because I am the best Caitlyn on the team.
That's exactly what it was.
We'll think about that one. But we recently, I say recently, but it was the start of the year and we're already like,
No, it was the end of last year.
it was, wasn't
yes,
it?
like maybe November, I think.
Yeah, but we presented a webinar on this topic for clinicians
Yes.
supporting PDA clients.
We did.
And it was one of our most popular live
Yes.
webinars to date,
Yes.
which is probably why it sprung to mind when we were brainstorming topics. We're like, you know what, this would be a really good one to talk about on the podcast too.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd start with your perspective on that. Why do you think it was one of our most popular? Because we have run a lot of live webinars.
We have, haven't we? So yeah, it was great. We had like over, or probably nearly 350
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
which was amazing. And so yes, definitely one of the most popular. And I wonder if it was one of the most popular because PDA, a controversial topic.
Yeah.
But I think that and through all the research and everything, and when I was looking, I couldn't find like too many webinars like what we presented because I found that a lot of the content you could come across was very much, which obviously has a place, but more opinion driven
Yeah.
in terms
True.
of moving into the controversy of is this a diagnosis? Is it not a diagnosis? And really strong opinions each way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Whereas with our webinar, it was presented and took a long time to research because of this as being like, this is what we do know, this is what we don't know, these are the opinions and things like that.
Yeah.
But what we do know and what we're here to learn is how do we actually support these clients the best way that we can.
Should we start with language?
Yes.
Yes.
That's a really great
Yeah.
point.
Yes. Okay. So PDA, pathological demand avoidance.
Sure.
Now, in terms of a note on language, and we spoke to lived experience adults about the language, it seems to be that there's no general consensus among the PDA community as to the language they prefer. So we're going to alternate basically between PDA person and PDA-er, just depending on what grammatically fits.
Yep.
How
Beautiful.
is our resident grammar gal too? So she'll correct us if we get it wrong.
Don't say that at the outset of my first podcast.
No,
Setting
we
me
like
up.
to pick on something in each of our guests. Just to
great.
like-
Some light hazing for the first episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. But yeah, so with the language side, that is probably something to note. And then did you want me to go into a little bit definition-wise?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, lay it on us.
Yeah.
Lay it on the listeners.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. We don't know, when we think about our listeners, we don't know what their level of experience in this
Yes.
space is.
Yes.
If they're listening because they truly only know the letters PDA
Yep.
or if they have worked with a lot of these clients.
Yes. So, I mean, I feel like I promised you a definition, but actually, because it is not a diagnosis as
Yeah.
of yet, there actually isn't agreed upon definition.
Yeah.
So to give you background, how it came about was there was this psychologist, Elizabeth Newson in the UK, and she did a lot of research in this area. And the reason it is not the reason it's not a diagnosis, but I guess as background to when it technically was, she saw this cohort of kids that she was working with where she felt there were common characteristics, but they didn't fit in the diagnostic label of, at the time, PDD-NOS, which is pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. So she then made a category within PDD-NOS of having a PDA Profile. Now, that diagnosis of PDD-NOS is in the old DSM.
Yeah.
So it's in the DSM-4.
Yep.
I saw a lot of kids with that diagnosis, which probably is starting to already show my age, embarrassingly. But yes, there was it tended to be the label that they slapped on early for kids that they were querying autism but didn't quite. They weren't sure, really.
Yes.
That was how it was mostly used with the kids that I was seeing at the time.
And we obviously know a lot more about autism now that it's all encompassing with the spectrum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas at that time, and I had recently started as well, it the way it got posed often to the clients was, they have PDD-NOS, not autism.
Yes. Yep.
It was so, whereas now we understand it as one spectrum. So when PDD-NOS was a thing, you could have the PDA profile within that.
Yeah.
So is that where the link with autism has come in?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So, and gosh, I cannot remember. I feel like the DSM-4 was out in 2003, 2004, and then we got the DSM-5.
I can't even remember my wedding anniversary year. So
Yeah, yikes.
stumped me there.
I feel like there's a 2003, 2013. I'm not sure. This is where Danny.
Yeah, I know.
She'd know it off the top of her head. The copyright date, everything. All I know is PDD-NOS in the DSM-4. We're at the DSM-5. There is no diagnosis of that. So
Yeah.
PDA is not within it.
Yep.
So what you need to know is it a diagnosis? No.
Yeah.
Not technically. It is not in the DSM-5 or the ICD-11.
Yep.
However, it's within the autism CRC guidelines, which were released a couple of years ago now, 1 to 2 years ago, as something for clinicians to be aware of when working with autistic children. So it's around and it is mentioned. If you're a clinician as well working in this space, you may have seen it written on your paediatrician letters as well.
Yeah.
So it's certainly around. But
A lot of the chatter now, though, is that it is perhaps something that can be used to describe lots of profiles within other neurodivergent diagnoses.
And I think that's certainly something that you looked through when you were looking into like the lived experience.
Yes.
And a lot of the comments we got.
Yes. Yes.
were around.
Yes. That's certainly true. That's the thing, isn't it? That, yes, this is where, like with PDD-NOS, it was born from.
Yeah.
But it certainly doesn't limit it to just being a diagnosis within autism. And this is where it's hard, isn't it? Where it is quite widely accepted that, rightly or wrongly, that it is a profile within autism.
Yeah.
But is it proven to only be a profile within autism?
Yep.
No. And how hard to actually research and to look at it when we actually don't have a solid diagnostic criteria.
100%. So I guess how do we use it within therapy? Because I think, a label's only as good as the information it gives us, isn't it? So I suppose for me, I think, something I hear a lot out of the clients that we're seeing is that the standard approaches that have previously worked for a number of kids, not just autistic kids, just don't work. And when you start to look at potentially approaching it from a more PDA lens, that we see much better outcomes. So I suppose, what's your experience within working with the kids that you've worked with?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things and that changed the way that I view it, so some people will talk about PDA as an anxiety disorder. Incorrect.
Yes.
PDA is a neurotype. Again, I'm speaking with the caveat there's no official diagnosis, but you guys get the vibe. It is much more likely that it is a neurotype, and having that type of brain causes you significant anxiety because all of the demand throughout your day, whether they're external, internal, that's another misconception that demands are only for example, Jackie, fill up my water, whereas actually a demand in that instance as well as my internal, my stomach saying, I'm a bit thirsty. So there's misconceptions around demands as well, but I think that's an important thing to remember, that it actually isn't, or is very unlikely, that it is an anxiety disorder. It is a neurotype that then causes that person to experience significant anxiety because of multiple factors of being human.
That's why there's lots of, I guess, opinion on posts where it's like, is it PDA or ODD? And it's actually, it shouldn't even.
It's not a question.
It's not a question. I'm going to say it's a silly question. Maybe that's controversial to say that, but it kind of is a silly question.
It is.
If you truly understand what
Yes.
both of those things are.
And I think that's when it is the kids, I suppose, where a PDA profile is potentially flagged is that it tends to be those really, those kids that really struggle with external demands specifically, and that the way they manage those external demands because of that anxiety that they're experiencing potentially I suppose makes it difficult for the adults supporting them.
Yes.
So I think that's potentially where it comes from. Do you agree? Or
a few things there. I have to say that I do not know about ODD to the level that I know about PDA.
Yeah.
So I'll start with that. And I would probably actually, maybe we can pop it in the show notes about some good people to have a look at who know more about ODD.
Yeah.
Because one of the big things that I do know about it is that it is very tied to race.
Interesting.
It is, yep. And from my understanding and what I've learned from others, especially more in the US, the diagnosis of oppositional
ODD
defiance
big.
disorder is big and disproportionately
diagnosed
for Black children.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we know that there is a lot of factors within that. And just from the things that I've been looking at, and maybe I'll have to dive into it at one point, but there's questions around that being valid.
Yeah, 100%.
That being a valid diagnosis.
Like
Like
in
actually,
that conduct disorder space and how
Absolutely.
it's related to trauma and it's really, there should not be comparisons with PDA.
no.
We're talking about something very different.
Something incredibly different. And we can, debate the validity of ODD another time.
Another
Add it
end.
to the
Stay
topics
tuned.
list.
Yes. But with PDA, because I know you mentioned your original question was like, so how do we help?
And how do we work?
So I think one of the big things, and that speaking with we got a lot of lived experience for this one, which was awesome. So we got
so
lived
fortunate.
experience parents who are PDA themselves, lived experience parents who are a PDA and their children are PDAs. Some of our kids we've chatted with.
Yes,
and I think one of the big things is that, and this is what one of our kids said, I cannot choose what I avoid. It just happens. And I think if one of the biggest things we can do is to support clinicians to understand the lens at which they look at these kids with what they're avoiding.
Yes.
It's
often things that kids want to do.
This is the thing. You actually, the PDA brain, it doesn't get to choose.
Yeah.
And so you need to look at it as though, like, think of a time where you've been really scared.
Yep.
You feel your threat system in your brain has gone off. Could be with anything. And now imagine feeling that way when you're asked to put your shoes on.
All the time. Yeah.
So, and I
needing
think
to use the bathroom or,
or wanting to go
participating
for
in an activity that you normally
Enjoy.
wanting to play basketball because it's a regulating strategy. But then that PDA really kicks in. So it's really important to understand that it activates the threat response in response to demands.
Yeah.
Yes.
Internal and external. So when you think of it like that, I can understand how that misconception of it's an anxiety disorder comes up because these kids are pretty much always in a threat state.
Yes.
Very common. So that I promise I'm getting to the original question of how do clinicians.
This podcast is all about tangents.
Yes, I was saying before I came
Should have
on.
renamed it.
Disappoint the listeners.
Yeah, this is great. On a work day, I'm just here and yapping. So I think that the way that we support clinicians to work with it is it's not like there is a PDA guidelines for intervention because remember, it is not a diagnosis. So this is what is also tricky, right? So we don't have solid criteria. We don't have solid intervention guidelines. But what we do have and what we look to is a lot of lived experience here.
Yeah.
And we also look, as we do with everything, but really at that neurodiversity affirming paradigm.
Yeah.
And then what we're going to do is draw on our knowledge from all the other, approaches that we work with and then apply them.
Yeah.
So, for example, co-regulation would be my first and biggest one.
Yeah.
It can be really hard too because we know that what impacts, obviously, our regulation is others around us.
Yes.
And so as an adult, if you are working with a PDA who has some very adaptive strategies to avoid demands. And remember this, when I say this, I'm not saying they are choosing it either.
No.
Let's just say adaptive strategies. Let's say that something that really gets to me, I can tell you something really gets to me. Whinging.
Only one.
Only one. It's my first step. Don't let them in on everything that's wrong with me. Whinging. Oh my gosh. You could throw a table at me and I don't. All right, a chair. Maybe not a table. That's quite impressive. Not bothered. A chair, like
You
whatever.
find it
right?
easy to regulate.
Yeah.
Easy to
Physical
regulate.
outbursts.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But also, again, we don't often, I mean, this is something you kind of work on, but we don't often get to choose what triggers us in those moments either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm just talking about as a general thing. Whereas if I've had a bad sleep,
Yeah.
everything will set me off.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't pick or choose. But if it is whinging, I always find that hard to regulate with. And so if a client that I have, if a way that they avoid and escape demands
Is
to
whinging,
keep their own
yeah.
brain safe, let's
Yes.
solidify that, is whinging, I am having a really hard time co-regulating, much harder than like Katie would, because that doesn't get to you as much as it gets to me.
Do you know what when we did put together that I say we, you did 98% of that hard work.
The 2%'s big. 2%'s big.
I checked all those full stops, hey?
Absolutely. Check my references. I hate referencing. I should say, actually, sorry, I don't. No, I do hate referencing. I love research.
You hate the process of doing the referencing list.
APA 7, for
Yes.
goodness sakes. So I'm like, I did it. Anyway, sorry,
I
go on.
found where we discuss sort of as clinicians shifting our focus or lens in that moment to a longer term goal.
Yes.
Because I think that's the thing. A lot of clinicians, if that situation were to occur in their therapy setting, their lens is often on, I just have to calm this child down.
Yes. Okay.
And so how we respond immediately versus if we're thinking longer term is what is our goal with this child, we
Yes.
respond differently there.
It is
Yes.
tricky, isn't it? That question of goal setting. And I think as a practice that's heavily goal driven and really outcome focused, there is a different lens when you're working with PDAs. It
Yes.
is very much creating a safe environment and lots of education and lots of those supporting strategies, like you said, like co-reg. It's so important.
So in
Yes.
terms of, and that's a great point actually, if we think environmental wise, because again, I really need everyone to have that lens of this person is really quite constantly in a threat state.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what do you do for someone when that's happening? So we're looking at co-regulation.
Yeah.
Katie, yes, you brought my attention to the attention one. We talk about it almost like a flashlight in terms of your short-term. Well, I shouldn't even say a flashlight, actually. It's probably not the best
I was
analogy.
going to say different flashlight to what we just discussed in our attention.
I
in
know,
our previous
sorry.
podcast.
So
Previous
just
episode.
erase that thought. Let me start again. Short-term and long-term focus. So I've got no analogy for it. But let's just say that your short-term focus is often quite immediate, whereas your long-term focus is like, what am I wanting for this young person in a month, 2 years, 20 years? I don't know, whatever it is, right? And when things happen that are highly emotional for whatever reason, or where we're more likely to get dysregulated, we are way more likely to be hijacked by the short-term urgency that we feel to rectify what is happening.
Yeah.
So someone's really upset, they're screaming, they're crying, you're like, oh my gosh, I just need to like calm them down, like you said. Whereas the long-term thought or focus might be like, what I'm trying to work towards is supporting this young person to understand their neurotype and like find ways of navigating the PDA brain, or not navigate. Oh no, navigating's probably all right. Just in terms of how they navigate that and equip them with different strategies, again, depending on what they're working on.
Yes.
So that's what Katie was talking about with that different focus. So we've got co-regulation, we've got where to put your focus.
Yeah.
A big thing with the goal setting is, yes, managing unsafe behaviours should totally be included in what you're working on. Obviously, safety is paramount.
Yeah.
But that is not actually ever, I would say. But please feel free to, tell us if you've had one where this was just it, where the managing unsafe behaviours is the total end goal.
Sure.
No.
It's often uncommon.
Yeah.
We are actually working
Trying
towards
to minimise the need for unsafe behaviours.
Yes. We're often trying to work towards, for example, if that young person, wants some more friends, or if the parents, like, actually one of the tricky things is they speak about a lot of unsafe things in order to get a reaction, and that is resulting in them being suspended from school. We need them to stay in school.
I have an example of that of one of our colleagues' clients that, came into the office and was just chatting and was curious about Macy, our therapy dog. And she came up and it was a really nice conversation and asking a lot of really good questions. And then it was like you almost saw where the demand of that social interaction was suddenly perceived as a demand.
Yes.
And turned and looked at me and said,
What they do.
"What would you do if I kicked her?"
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting shift in the dynamic. And that's where, that co-regulation needs to come in. And I like to think that I'm pretty well rehearsed in not responding to those kinds of things. But it was a really, I guess, enlightening interaction to see how that
to see it in real time in that moment
yes,
as well.
Yeah, and it was not to be malicious. It was not even to threaten. The intention wasn't to make me feel uncomfortable.
It was to
It was
escape
very much
the
to
demand.
escape that perceived demand of that social interaction and the social interaction going well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is a really great example, actually, that we can sort of like latch onto with what we were talking about with the focus.
Yeah.
Your long-term focus, and it's not even your client, but, even just being anchored by the long-term focus of like, regulation or social supports or something, whereas that short-term focus, which can be really hijacked, especially if someo's just threatened to hurt your dog, this gorgeous little Goldie that we've got in the corner.
She might make an appearance one day.
Yeah, hopefully. That obviously short term, that can be really emotion provoking and shoot your regulation. Like,
And you can only imagine
shoot your nerves.
And
shot
parents
nerves.
find it
Oh my
really
gosh.
hard.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You can only
Parents
imagine
find that
those
really
parents that are
difficult. Don't be
seeing it 1,000 times a day.
Don't say that.
Yeah.
Apologise
That's
right
dangerous.
now. That's dangerous.
Don't do that. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And then pulling them away. And then all of a sudden we've got this young person who's
That's
having...
only going to trigger the stress more, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Yes, and it's so hard, isn't it? Because often with... Oh, she's
Here she
heard me.
comes.
Yeah, here she comes.
Special guest
Hello.
appearance.
Yes.
If you're watching on YouTube, you're very lucky right now.
Yes,
Hi,
I've got a little
Macy.
guest. And if oh no, near the glass. Yikes. All right, we'll see how we go. Is that, yes, when you are often triggered by that short term or urgency, I should probably say, it's very likely that your behaviours won't be in line with what you're working towards. Yelling at him, pulling him away, whatever it might have been that it could have elicited in the parents or yourself, actually is not helpful. And one of the really tricky things, and this is where I think when we're talking again about how do we help these kids, Ross Green's work, I think really shines here in terms of lucky and unlucky communicators.
Yes.
That is an unlucky communicator through and through.
Yeah.
Similar needs of saying, I'm not
feeling
coping.
uncomfortable here.
Yeah,
I'm
can
not,
you help me?
Can you help me? Can I leave?
Yeah.
Nah, the threat response has been activated. So it's
Yeah.
sort of
doesn't elicit much empathy.
No, and it's also often being aware of equalising behaviour.
Yes.
So what that is if the PDA brain is very sensitive to power dynamics.
Yeah.
So this is really important to navigate too. So when you're thinking about functional ways to support,
Yeah.
if you're looking at
Yeah,
skill
the power
building,
over thing will not work.
Yeah.
it will not work.
Yeah.
It will not work. It does not feel, it is not helpful to exert power and often bounce between feeling powerful and powerless. It does not make sense. I don't know if power with is the same, but
Could
that's
be.
Coin it, quick.
Cowie 2025. I won't APA 7 reference it though. That is someone else's
Too
job.
hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just Danny had to reference a podcast episode.
For someone who's made up something, I don't think you can. But what you are looking at is that I would say in that moment, that child was going for the power over
Yes.
to make you feel powerless. And when I say to make you feel, again, I'm not saying
An intentional
no,
choice.
no. But we're going for power over in order to regain control
Yeah,
of that
feel
scenario so that we can feel safer. So all of this is to say is that when you look at your goals for a PDA child, they will likely look different to what
Yes.
you are used to. Your progress will be slower.
Yes.
you will be more flexible than ever.
Yeah.
Some of our kids.
A strength of ours.
Yes, yes. I'm flexible therapy-wise, okay? They're laughing
As soon as
because
she leaves the therapy room, questionable.
yeah, I am certainly one of the most rigid people on the team, but it's
No, we love it. We love it. That's why you're getting so much information out of this podcast because it has been a real journey getting this information as clearly as we can. And sorry to interrupt because I think you were going down the road of how safety is so important when it comes to our approach and long-term focus.
Yes, and long-term focus. So your goals will look quite different. The flexibility may look like that the child, like some examples that we've had, and obviously, you need a lot more context for these to probably sound like the right choice, but just so you know, we've had kids who choose whether they attend or not for that one.
Yes.
For that session. And then we might just do some parent work.
Therapy is a demand. We need to understand
is
that.
a demand.
The interaction with us, setting goals, that comes up a lot. How do you even set a goal when a goal is a demand?
Yes. And I have had to flip-flop between so many different almost when the child's like self-identified a little bit of a goal, like we've ended up getting there. And then the next week they're like, no, what? Obviously, it's hit that threshold regarding that being perceived as a demand for whatever way. So you have to get super creative in how you're helping this young person. And I think it's a real, I don't know if this is the right word, almost ego check.
Yep.
But in terms of we need to be able to not just feel like we're helping because we did some social stuff.
Yes.
It actually needs to help.
Yes.
And this is the thing, isn't it, that it can feel like a flop when you have designed this session plan, you've like me, you've used ChatGPT to make it related to their interest, like all of these different things, and then it just goes totally haywire. And it can feel like a flop if they are like, well, no, that's not a goal for me anymore. I don't want to work on that.
Yeah.
But when you are anchored by your long-term focus of supporting this young person, let's just say, to develop trusting relationships with adults so they're able to express some of their own needs, the way I've adapted that session is a win. Yes, my 10 minutes of excellent planning and the great things I had planned, gone.
Yes.
Irrelevant. That is where you have to check yourself. Just because I thought this was the best thing to do, and to be honest, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
If it's not effective for that person, it is not effective.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how good you think you've planned something or been like, and then you're just trying to like force a square peg through a round hole.
Yes. The process and how we're working towards those long-term goals is more important than the outcome of a session.
Yeah.
Yes.
For all OT, actually.
Absolutely. And it's just that with PDA, you will likely
The mirror
go...
gets held up quite frequently, doesn't it?
And one of this may sound a little off topic. It's still on topic, but in terms of like, your goals and running your sessions and the ego check, one of the lived experience adults I spoke to, they were just like, honestly, you just have to get a thick skin. That is one of the recommendations, and it's really important there as OTs. I hope we're all quite good at it, because if you can't separate your own personal views from your profession and other people, you're probably not doing a very good job because we're meant to be client-centered, which means not my views-centered.
Yeah.
But even things like thinking of your own triggers with things, because, for example, swearing to me does not bother me one bit.
Yeah.
But I know a colleague that it actually does.
Yeah.
And things like that. Or there might be, because often we can go for a lot of shock value for our clients, there might be some things that you, rightly so, find more or less triggering.
Yeah.
Yes.
It might be things to do with race. It might be things to do with sexuality.
Yeah.
There have been some real kickers in terms of the topics discussed in order to avoid the demand.
Yeah.
We need to be really aware of what gets to us more because often what can elicit that response in us, just like anyone, you're not choosing. I'm not sitting there when whinging's happening being like, I'm going to pick this one to really frustrate me.
Right, my gears.
Yeah. All right, let's go into it. Like, that's not what you're doing. And that's not what the kids are doing either. So just being your awareness of those things to help you and that's where you really learn into all of those ND affirming core principles as well. But I just find that in summation, working with our PDA clients, it's been some of the most rewarding work because often these kids, just from what we hear, they have not been able to be helped elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been a real slog and a real challenge.
And don't have many safe, affirming relationships.
No,
Yeah.
because
That
of the
have stuck around as
yes,
well.
because of so much
Yeah.
misunderstanding. We have had, like, honestly, teachers who you could probably quite confidently say, I mean, hate might be too strong of a word, but seriously dislike these kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so they're rocking up to a place where they don't, someone who needs safer
not a
relationships
safe room.
more than
Yeah.
anyone. And they don't even have them.
Yeah.
So that's like maybe as a little tidbit at the end, because I'm aware we're, you know, running out of our time, is that kids with PDA, and I wasn't able to find, again, it's really hard to find like good solid research because there's no agreed upon diagnostic, et cetera, but lived experience wise are much more likely to be traumatized from events. So not just saying like experiencing like traumatic events, but post the event, experiencing trauma because of the way that their brain is wired in terms of being so hyper aware of threat.
Yeah.
So that's a really important thing for us to note as well. That, you know, we've got someone who's much more vulnerable.
Yeah.
So we find that the progress is often slower, but boy, is it very rewarding.
Yeah.
To actually be able to help when this young person very likely has found it really hard to access good help.
Yeah.
Thanks,
That's
Caitlyn.
been, it's been so interesting, and I'm sure you could sit there and keep talking about it.
Good. I've got like points in my mind where I'm like, oh, we could have covered
I didn't see
that.
But I will say that our Was Once live webinar is now available on demand.
Yes.
So I'll pop the link in the show
Yes,
notes.
please
because,
do.
Yeah, if you are a clinician that you found this episode helpful or interesting,
Yes.
there is 2.5 hours worth of that
There is.
in that webinar.
Or if
If
you
you're not
didn't,
sick of their voices.
I was going to say, or if
this
you
is your
didn't like
chance.
this and you didn't like me being on the podcast, don't buy it.
Don't click that link.
Please. You'll be put off the rest of our stuff forever. Don't bother. But in saying that, because I know you started with thinking like, well, why was this our most popular?
Yeah.
I actually think too, with the time that we put it onto our platform, on
Yeah.
our online education, it's been the most popular, the quickest.
That's so funny.
Yeah, as well.
Yes.
Like people
Yep.
are really
Clinicians
interested.
are hungry for the information. They
Yeah.
want to do well. And
That's
that's
what I
what
was
we
going to
love
say.
about
I love that there's so many clinicians that want to better themselves in terms of working with these clients.
Yeah.
And obviously I've got a huge bias, but I really rate that Prez. I think that because I think that it's so
do I.
nice to get
Yeah.
like really well-rounded
Yeah.
information,
Yeah.
and it doesn't just sit in the controversy of is it not?
No, that's right.
It's very much, it's classic OT, isn't it? It's very function driven. I'm
Yeah,
like, what are the
it really is.
outcomes?
Yes,
And the workbook is really good as well.
Yeah.
We're a modest bunch.
We are a modest bunch. And since we're so modest, I thought I'd add on to that the feedback was amazing.
We'll chuck some testimonials in.
Yeah, show notes. Just the whole Survey Monkey results.
Screenshots and everything.
Yep,
Well,
absolutely.
thank you for joining us.
Thank
Caitlyn.
you for having me.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.